So my vlog, I was like, what can I make to give Mallory some insight onto my life? And I was like, well, I pretty much only talk about books, and I've read a bunch of books these past few months, so why don't I do my book haul and tell you what I'm reading? Okay, hello. Well, you can tell I switched locations because the roof was a lovely idea and very photogenic, but also it is very windy up there and bright, and some lighting made it look like I had a mustache. So I have opted for slightly dimmer lighting and the comfort of my room. Here we are. So, as I was saying, going to talk about my recommendations, and I think that you should read all these and hopefully you'll enjoy some. Okay, so as I'm sure you have had, I have had an abundance of time over quarantine that I've done nothing with, except for deep dive election news, case numbers, and anything else that will give me anxiety. So as a more healthy coping mechanism, I try to read. Okay, well, picking back up, this is The Gone World by Tom Schweisterlich. I read this book because my boss recommended it to me. And as you know, Mallory, I work in publishing. My boss is an editor, and I'm her assistant. And generally, I read anything she recommends to me because she has yet to give me a miss. And this book was another book that I loved. And in fact, I reference it all the time now when I'm talking about anything that has to do with sci-fi or time travel, because I think that this book is one of the best uses I've seen of it, and definitely one of the most inventive uses. If you want to watch a show that does just as really interesting things with time travel, I would recommend Dark. And I've told you about Dark like 25 times, and every time I bring it up, I like pretend that I haven't brought it up, and I get really excited, and then you tell me that I've already told you about it. But I'll tell you about it again. It's clearly a writer's show. Like, you can tell that they've plotted out all 3 seasons, like when they sat down to write the first season, and that's really, really rewarding, and I think makes for some really rich storytelling that you don't often get, especially in like high drama sci-fi shows. And so that's one of the reasons that I love it. Do not watch the dubbed version because it sounds awful. Watch the subbed version because then people will respect you. But anyway, I'd say The Gone World is kind of like the book version of Dark. The pitch says it's Inception meets True Detective, and I read that and I agree, but also I'm wondering if they mixed up Interstellar with Inception, which I understand because they're both I names and they both have very troubled, rugged men as their leaders who have issues with their children and, I don't know, no happy relationships in their lives. But I'd say Interstellar more than Inception because The Gone World is also in space and deals with like time manipulation and time space and all that stuff. So The Gone World focuses on Shannon Hale, who's this like little red girl here. And Shannon Hale? Shannon Moss. Is Shannon Hale an actress? I don't know. I think she probably is. Shannon Moss is the main character here, and basically she is an agent with, yes, the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. So the premise of this book is basically that when Reagan started the Space Force, it actually continued secretly, and the Army or the Navy has discovered how to travel into what they call deep time and deep space. And deep space is kind of like what it sounds like, just basically going into the very, very far edges of the universe and seeing what's out there. But deep time is really interesting because it allows you to travel into things they call IFTs, like IFT, which are possible futures. So what they do with those is when a crime occurs in the terra firma, which is the like modern world, the current contemporary world, they'll send an agent into one of the possible futures so that the agent can then kind of figure out, can kind of go like say 15 years in the future, see what has been solved, who ended up doing it, and then come back and hopefully prevent that crime from happening, catch them faster, or just report back. So they'll do that with stuff like terrorist events, like anything, but the scariest thing is that in every potential future they travel to, they keep finding this event called the Terminus, which is the end of the world apocalypse, very creepy, has a lot of like upside down cross stuff. I don't know. Creeped me out. But the thing with the Terminus is that every future they travel to, it keeps getting closer. So they first track it, say, at like 22,500 the year. And then they track it again at 2,300 and then 2,100. And they are not sure why it's getting closer. So while all this is going on, this terrible crime happens with a former soldier from the Naval Crimes Unit that Shannon is a part of. And so she is tasked with going into the future, figuring out what happened to the soldier. And of course, I'm not going to spoil anything, but it's tied to bigger stuff. And it is just, it's one of those books that I didn't fully understand, but it was like listening to a very smart Stephen Hawking program where you like don't understand it fully, but you're so amazed by it that you accept what he's saying without thinking too deeply. And like, that's what the math in this book was like. I feel like the author has thought so clearly through this world building and through this timeline that it was just, I don't know, it's very impressive and it makes for a really, really compelling story. So I highly recommend this one. It was going to be a movie. I always Google if they're going to be movies. This one was, but then it didn't sell that many copies, so I'm wondering if they like pulled it back. But I think the people would enjoy it, so The Gone World, definitely recommend. Okay, the next book I read was The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel. You may know her from Station 11, is her most famous book. The Glass Hotel, I was not as impressed with as I was hoping to be, although it was impressive. I felt like a lot of The Glass Hotel was Emily St. John Mandel showing us why she earned the name Emily St. John Mandel, which is to say she writes like someone who spent their life like in a very wealthy cabin in Connecticut and like has only written long form poetry and like probably somehow knew Henry like Thoreau, you know, even though they came from different time periods. You just feel like you would talk to St. John Mandel and she'd be like, oh yeah, my good friend Thoreau, I stayed at Walden with him. What I'm saying is she's just an author who has a very strong style, and I appreciate that, but here I felt like it was all about the style and it was kind of lacking the plot it promised to me, which was like this mystery, like multi-generational ghost story, all these things mixed with literary. That was definitely in there, but I felt like that wasn't her focus. You know, I feel like when she was writing it, she was like, okay, I'm gonna put point A to point B, but I'm going to spew the entire dictionary along the way, and that will help you realize your inner metaphors. I don't know. That might be a little harsh. It was a good book, and there are some really compelling points. I actually really like the structure of it. She structures it in a really unique and like beautiful way. I'll show you the table of contents. If you can see, this almost reads like a poem to me. I think it's very beautiful. I just almost, as a reader and as someone who wanted to escape this world that we find ourselves in, I don't know, it's just, you know, it's good. Now I've read it, I can go to dinner parties and talk about it and people will think I'm smart, but it's a kind of a book I think that you read to feel smart is my secret diagnosis. Okay, so The Glass Hotel, she's a beautiful writer. Station 11 is fabulous. This one was not my particular favorite, but it was fine. Okay, let's move on to one that is my particular favorite, which is Tana French, In the Woods. This is Tana's first book. I know that you've already read one by her that I like made you read. I think I actually got it for you for your birthday, called The Witch Elm. That was the first one I read by her as well, but then a few months ago I went back and read her first book, which is part of her Dublin Murder Squad series, and kind of was her start off. And I venture to say that I found it even more compelling than The Witch Elm, which I already thought was amazing. Tana, I could rave about for a long time, and I often do, because I think she exemplifies what I believe in as a writer and a reader, which is that you can take genre fiction and elevate it to be just as intelligent and profound and meaningful as literary fiction. So Tana French books are murder mysteries, they're thrillers, but they're so powerfully done and well done that I would say they remind me of kind of other really kind of icons of the genre. Like, they remind me of like first season True Detective, you know, which we comped a little bit ago. They remind me of like Sharp Objects, just really these books that use murder as a way to discuss, I think, like the human condition and relationships and family and all these things, and just also give you a really, really compelling and propulsive plot that you want to keep reading. So that's my rave on Tana French in general. If anyone tries to make you feel dumb for like wanting to read a murder mystery and not reading David Foster Wallace, I think that Tana could outright David Foster Wallace any day. I also find him slightly boring. You know, boys like David Foster Wallace, I feel like they're in your English class and they're constantly playing devil's advocate on everything. You know, that's just like what anyway, I feel like Tana could do better than him. Okay, so In the Woods. This book is about this boy, Rob Ryan, whose real name is Adam Ryan. And when he was a little child, his two best friends were like terribly murdered / they disappeared. Actually, no one knows what happened to them, and he was with them, and he's the only one that survived. And he's grown up kind of being a part of this unsolved mystery, and no one knows what happened. Like, he's kind of blocked it out. He's moved on, he's changed his name, and now he's a detective, and he ends up being called back to the same suburb / small town right outside of Dublin where he grew up and where the disappearances of his friends took place, because another little girl has died. It's about basically him going through this case and also trying to process what happened to him. And I guess why I pick it up is just the plot delivers really, really well, but also it will make you think, it will make you upset, it will make you think of that one like douchebag you went out with, and he's perfectly represented in the main character. Great book. Okay, so the last book I'm going to talk about is this one, The Library at Mount Char. It's by Scott Hawkins. I'm actually currently reading this one. And again, this was a boss recommendation. My boss, Krista, recommended this to me. And you know what? It's another home run so far. I love it. This is really strange fantasy. Like, the weirdest, most intricate fantasy I've read in a while. That's also contemporary fantasy. Like, it's not high fantasy Lord of the Rings type. It's on Earth. And the basic concept is that there are these 8 children. I think it's 8. It might be 9. But there are these children who basically, when they were kids, they were adopted by this all-powerful figure they call Father. And like I said, I'm not through it, but it's basically implied that Father is God, or like a godlike equivalent figure. And they're basically trained by him in these different categories. What do they call it? I think they call it Okay, so they've been trained in catalogs. Each of them has a specific catalog, and the catalogs are things like war and death, or the main character's hers is language, so she knows all languages in the world. And what happens basically is that father, so the god figure, disappears and no one knows where he's gone. And his children are now trying to find him. This book is really, I mean, it's definitely graphic, it's dark, it's gritty, but I think the thing that surprised me is that there's a lot of humor in it too. It's really just the dialogue between the children and the people they meet is really, really funny. The character descriptions themselves are funny, and I'm really impressed with the way that Scott, the author, has been able to inject so much depth and different layers into this book. Also, if you like world building, if you like intricate plotting, things like that, this is definitely your book. You know, there's so many different powerful ancient figures that they meet, kind of all these other gods and all these potential futures, and just, I would just love to talk with him because I just want to know how he came up with this and like how long it took him to come up with this. I also think he'd be a really weird person to talk to at a party. He just seems to me like the type of person who has written very extensive fan fiction, and eventually he got to this place, and I'm very glad he did, but that doesn't mean I want to read the fan fiction or hear about it over my wine. Yeah, but that being said, Library at Mount Char, great book, recommend it. Well, I had some other books, but I think that this is just going over time, so I'm gonna cut it off there and leave you in suspense. If you want to know the other books I read, you should text me about them, and I know for a fact I've texted you to read several more, and I hope that you read them, and I also hope that you enjoy this and find my discussion of these interesting, and I am very excited for your next vlog.